Hello there, and welcome. Imagine yourself standing in the heart of Eastern Europe, where vast, snow-covered plains stretch as far as the eye can see. The air is sharp, and the biting cold seems to cut straight through you. The world is still, save for the whisper of the wind through the trees, and the snow falls in soft blankets that conceal the earth below. This is the world of the ancient Slavic people, a world where winter isn't just a season, but a way of life. For the Slavic people of old, surviving the long, harsh winters was not just a matter of getting through a few cold months. No, it was a daily battle against nature, a fight for survival that tested every ounce of their resourcefulness, ingenuity, and resilience. These winters were brutal. The temperature could drop to bone-chilling lows. The snow could fall so thick it buried entire villages. And the days were so short it often felt like the sun itself was retreating from the world. But the people of these lands were not defeated by the seasons. Instead, they adapted. They created systems, rituals, and practices designed to see them through the darkest months. Winter, for them, wasn't just about enduring, it was about thriving. It was a time to lean on community, a time when every family member and every neighbor played an essential role in the survival of the group. It was a season of both isolation and connection, where the strength of the collective ensured that no one faced the cold alone. You see, survival in these lands was never just an individual struggle. It was a shared experience, woven into the fabric of daily life. From preparing food that would last through the winter to building homes that could withstand the weight of the snow, every aspect of life was designed with the cold in mind. And even more so, it was about resilience, the ability to bounce back after a failed harvest, after a harsh storm, after a sickness that swept through the village. It was a spirit of tenacity that ran deep within the Slavic people, as deeply as the roots of the trees they lived beside. As we embark on this journey through the frozen landscapes of ancient Slavic lands, we'll discover how these people navigated the challenges of winter. Together, we will explore the ways they prepared, the tools they crafted, and the traditions they upheld to survive the long, dark nights. We'll learn about their communal spirit, where no task was too great or too small to be done alone. In their unity, they found strength. In their shared labor, they found warmth. From the preparation of food that would last through the snowstorms, to the careful tending of livestock who relied on their caretakers for survival, the Slavic people's approach to winter was one of careful planning and precise action. Hunting, gathering, and storing were all critical parts of the equation. The land around them, both wild and tamed, offered what it could: meat, grain, herbs, but only if they knew how to preserve it, how to make it last. As you'll soon see, the Slavic people didn't just survive the winter. They lived through it with a kind of quiet strength that was as enduring as the cold itself. In their deep connection with the land, in their respect for the forces of nature, they learned to live in harmony with the winter rather than merely endure it. But their survival didn't come without its hardships. Winter meant isolation. It meant long days with little sunlight, and long nights where the wind howled like a beast outside the walls of their homes. It meant struggling to find warmth and food, to keep their families safe and healthy when disease and frostbite could claim a life in the blink of an eye. It was a time when every small action could mean the difference between life and death. Yet, despite these challenges, the Slavic people found ways to thrive. Their resourcefulness was unmatched, from using every part of the animals they hunted to ensuring that every last bit of firewood was used efficiently. They found ingenious ways to preserve food, like smoking meat or pickling vegetables, ensuring that when the land lay dormant under the snow, they still had sustenance to live on. They learned to craft tools from stone, bone, and wood, knowing that every item had to be durable enough to last through the harshest weather. And when it came time to gather, they did so together. The cold, oppressive winter could have driven them apart, but instead, it brought them closer. Shared hardships fostered a strong sense of community. It was the bonds between families and villages that made the difference. No one faced the winter alone. There was strength in numbers, and the Slavic people knew this well. As we go deeper into their world, you'll understand how every ritual, every task, was more than just a chore. They were lifelines. From the communal meals they shared to the prayers they offered in the depths of winter, every tradition was built around the concept of survival and unity. Even the darkest days were lightened by the warmth of shared company, by the stories passed down around the hearth fire, and by the belief that with enough effort, enough preparation, and enough heart, they could make it through to the next season. In this journey, we will take a closer look at how the Slavic people embraced winter not as an enemy, but as a challenge to be conquered. We will discover how their deep connection with the earth, their respect for the forces of nature, and their unwavering resilience allowed them to endure. So, I invite you to step into their world, a world where winter was both a fierce enemy and a revered teacher. A world where survival wasn't just about enduring the cold, but about mastering it, thriving in it, and emerging stronger on the other side. The Slavic people didn't just survive the winter, they made it their own. As autumn wanes and the sun begins to dip lower in the sky, you feel the cold in the air, the early warning of the coming winter. For centuries, your people have learned the bitter lessons of winter, and as you stand in the quiet of your village, the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath your boots, you know the season of survival is upon you. It is not just about the freezing temperatures, the heavy snowfalls, or the long, dark nights. Winter, for you and those around you, is an opportunity to prepare. Prepare for the freezing winds that will sweep across the land, for the days when the sun seems to vanish entirely, and for the months of scarcity that demand every ounce of your cunning and labor. Preparation is key. You've been waiting for this moment all year, when the harvest comes in, and the last few days of warmth offer their final breath before the frost. The urgency is palpable, and it's no exaggeration to say that your entire survival rests on what you manage to store away before the frost takes hold. Once that first snow hits, once the rivers freeze and the forests become unreachable, you and your family and your village must rely on what you've gathered, preserved, and stashed away in the hope that it will carry you through to the next spring. It's not just the physical chill that makes winter so harsh. It's the way it isolates you. For weeks on end, your home will be the only place where life continues. The roads will be buried beneath layers of snow, and hunting will become difficult as the land sleeps beneath the frost. Every meal you eat during the winter months will be the result of what you carefully preserved and stockpiled. Winter is when your foresight, your effort, and your patience pay off. You've spent months preparing now. The cold will test your work, your readiness, and your will to survive. The process of stockpiling is an art, a craft that every family in the village takes seriously. The elderly share their wisdom, and the younger generation takes to the fields, forests, and rivers, learning the ways of preservation, foraging, and storage that have been passed down from their ancestors. You and the others in your village are well versed in the effort it takes to survive this long, harsh season. The first step? Food. The harvest is the heart of the stockpiling process. You've worked tirelessly throughout the summer and fall, tilling the soil, planting seeds, and nurturing the crops, knowing that your survival depends on the abundance of the land. Now, as the last grains of wheat, barley, and oats are reaped, and the final fruits and vegetables are pulled from the earth, it's time to think about how to make them last. Grains like oats, barley, and wheat are central to your winter survival. They will be ground into flour and stored in large sacks, tied tightly to protect them from the rats and damp. You've already cleared out the barn, making room for the bulging sacks, carefully stowed away in the cool, dry corners, ready to sustain you through the cold. The smell of the freshly ground flour lingers in the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the barn. Then there are the root vegetables, carrots, beets, turnips, and potatoes, the hardy crops that will endure the cold and provide essential nutrients throughout the winter months. You've gathered them carefully and stored them either in underground pits or cool cellars. Each vegetable is checked for bruises or rot before being placed gently into its designated space. These root vegetables can be eaten fresh or in stews, which will keep you warm when the chill bites hardest. Next, the fruits: apples, pears, and berries. These won't last long unless preserved, and so you turn to your ancestors' techniques. Apples and pears are peeled and sliced, then dried in the warm sun before being stored in baskets. The berries are cooked down into jams and jellies, rich with sugar and the sweetness of the summer months, sealed in glass jars that will keep the sunshine locked in for months. These fruits will be savored during the darkest days, a small taste of summer to break the monotony of dried meats and root vegetables. Meat is one of the hardest resources to preserve, but also one of the most crucial for getting through the cold. Fresh meat will be impossible to find once the first snow falls and the game becomes scarce. So, hunting is a major part of the preparations, and once the animals are caught, there's no time to waste. The process is exhausting but necessary. Whether it's a deer, boar, or smaller game, like rabbits and pheasants, each part of the animal must be used. You skin, butcher, and prepare the meat carefully, ensuring that nothing goes to waste. To preserve the meat, you turn to two essential methods: salting and smoking. The meat is generously rubbed with salt, a natural preservative that draws out the moisture, and then hung over a low-burning fire in the smokehouse. The smoke from the fire wraps around the meat, infusing it with flavor while also curing it. This preserved meat will be eaten in soups and stews, and it will provide the protein your body needs to endure the cold, long nights. For the smaller cuts and organs, they are dried in the open air, sometimes flavored with herbs or spices, and then stored in tightly sealed sacks or baskets. The smell of drying meat fills the house during this time, and the sight of large hams hanging from the rafters is a comforting one. You know that even when the snow is deep, when the world is silent, you and your family will not go hungry. Water, despite its simplicity, is one of the most overlooked aspects of winter preparation. When the snow comes, the rivers freeze, and the wells fill with ice, leaving you with no immediate access to fresh water. During the warmer months, You've made sure to dig wells deep enough that the freezing temperatures wouldn't reach the bottom. But as the frost creeps closer, it's time to secure your water for the months ahead. You filled large barrels with water and stored them near the hearth, where the heat from the fire will help prevent the water from freezing overnight. In the mornings, you fill up your vessels again, ensuring that you always have enough for cooking, cleaning, and drinking. The water is carefully rationed, and every drop is accounted for. The care with which you handle this basic resource becomes a small, constant reminder of how important each task is. It's one thing to have the food, but without water, the fight for survival becomes infinitely harder. None of your preparations would mean much without one final essential: firewood. Fire is the lifeblood of your home. It's the source of heat, the means to cook, and the light that will pierce through the long winter nights. You know that without the fire, survival becomes impossible. And so, as autumn's warmth fades, you turn to the forests. You, along with your family, spend hours, days, and weeks in the woods, chopping wood, stacking logs, and preparing enough fuel to last the winter. The sound of the axe chopping against the wood echoes through the trees, and the smell of pine fills your lungs. The firewood is split into small, manageable pieces, and each log is stacked neatly in piles, sheltered from the snow and rain. The larger logs are reserved for the coldest days, when the wind howls and the nights are at their longest. The smaller kindling is kept close, ready to be used in the morning when the fire needs to be stoked back to life. You take care to keep the wood dry, stacking it in such a way that the air can circulate and ensure its quick burning. The cold months may stretch for what feels like eternity, but with enough firewood, you will stay warm. As the wind howls outside and the snow piles high, you'll sit by the fire, the warmth wrapping around you, knowing that the hours spent chopping and stacking were worth every aching muscle. The fire is the final indispensable resource that binds all your efforts together. It's the invisible thread that ties everything to survival. As the last of the grain is stored and the firewood piles grow taller, there is a moment of stillness. The final preparations are underway. You double-check your stores, ensuring that every grain of rice is safely tucked away, every piece of meat properly salted or smoked. The root vegetables are carefully checked for any sign of rot. You've stored enough firewood to keep the hearth burning for weeks, maybe months. Your water barrels are full, and you know that the community around you is also prepared, working together to share the load. But there's no time for complacency. Winter is a fierce and unforgiving force, and it doesn't care how much you've prepared. It will test you, and you will rise to meet it, for you are ready. Each task you've completed, each drop of water stored, each log chopped, has brought you one step closer to survival. And so, as the last days of autumn slip away and the first snowflakes begin to fall, you stand ready. You've done your work, and now you can only wait, knowing that your efforts, your preparation, will carry you through whatever winter has in store. In the heart of the Slavic winter, the true magic happens behind closed doors, amidst the smoky haze of the hearth and the rhythmic chopping of meat. It is not simply the cutting of meat or the laying out of salted cuts. This is a carefully orchestrated ritual that demands patience, skill, and the careful attention of every family member. Preserving meat is, after all, a matter of life and death when the snow lies thick outside and the air bites with such cold that it feels as if the very marrow in your bones will freeze. You can hear the crackle of the fire as the first batches of meat are salted, the brine soaking into every inch, ensuring that nothing is left unprotected. The preservation of meat, after all, is a battle against time. This is an old art, learned over generations. And here, within the dimly lit room, under the watchful eyes of parents, children, and elders, the process unfolds like a ritual passed down from the first slivers of civilization itself. The first and most essential step in the preservation of meat is salting. Your family's table will depend on this, and so will your very survival. The meat is carefully butchered lamb, pork, venison, boar, all the game that has been hunted and slaughtered with an eye toward keeping everyone fed during the long winter months. The task of salting begins at once, with hands deftly rubbing thick, coarse salt into the cuts. Each piece must be thoroughly coated, and not a speck of the meat can be left exposed. Salt is a natural preservative, and for centuries, people in the Slavic lands have relied on it to ensure that meat would last through the brutal, dark months of winter. With the salt packed into every crevice of the meat, the water from within the muscle is drawn out, leaving behind a hardened, cured exterior. It's a transformation of sorts. The meat that once could spoil within days now becomes something that could be safely stored for months. Every cut of meat now stands as a testament to your family's dedication and foresight. The salted pieces are then arranged in wooden barrels or large stone crocks, packed tightly together to maximize space and minimize exposure to air. But the salting alone is not enough. The barrels are covered with heavy cloths or more salt to ensure no moisture sneaks in and that the process of curing continues uninterrupted. Once the initial salting is done, it's time for the second act in this preservation drama: smoking. The Slavic people know better than anyone that smoking meat is not just about flavor, it's about ensuring the meat can withstand the worst of winter's grasp. The smokehouse is where the magic happens, where wood and smoke meld together to preserve the meat for months. The meat is hung up high, strung on thick twine, and left to hang in the dense smoke for hours, sometimes even days. Birchwood, carefully selected for its rich and steady burn, fills the smokehouse with a scent so intoxicating that it could trick your senses into forgetting the cold. The meat slowly turns a deep reddish brown, its edges crispy and encased in the smoky, earthy layers that will protect it from spoilage. It is not just the taste that changes. The meat now holds within it the essence of the fire, of the smoke that will keep it safe. This process of smoking deepens the preservation, rendering the meat both delicious and resilient against the encroaching cold of winter. The low heat dries the meat, making it less vulnerable to the bacteria that thrives in warmth and moisture. It becomes hardened, almost leathery, a piece of sustenance that could survive even the harshest of winters. Once the smoking is complete, the meat is checked for readiness. If it's done right, the smell alone will be enough to make your mouth water. The dark crust gives way to a tender, flavorful interior, which will provide nourishment for days to come. Now that the meat has been salted and smoked, it is time for the final step: storage. The meat must be kept in a cool, dry place, one that protects it from heat, humidity, and light. The stone cellars beneath your home are ideal, as they remain naturally cool and dark, providing the perfect environment for the meat to continue to cure. You take care to hang it carefully in the cellar, ensuring the meats are spaced just enough to allow air to circulate around them. You've worked hard to prepare this food, and now you must ensure that it lasts. The stone walls of the cellar are thick and solid, but even so, you check regularly for signs of mold or rot. If any piece looks less than perfect, you remove it immediately, knowing that a single mistake could spell disaster for the entire stockpile. For the next few months, you will depend on this preserved meat. It will sustain you through the cold, help you keep your strength, and offer comfort on the longest nights. The meat, once hung in the smokehouse, is now ready to be cooked into stews, roasted over the fire, or simply sliced for a quick meal. While the preservation of meat takes up much of the attention in the cold months, the humble vegetables are just as important. These root crops are often the backbone of the Slavic winter diet, providing not just nourishment but the comforting, earthy flavors that make each meal more than just a necessity. It's a taste of the earth itself. Pickling vegetables has long been a favorite method of preservation in the Slavic lands. It is as much a part of the culture as the family gatherings that fill the winter nights. The art of pickling is a carefully timed dance with the elements, and it is a skill that every household must perfect if it is to endure the long, dark months. Pickling, at its most basic, is a way to preserve the harvest, turning the bounty of summer and autumn into a jar of vibrant flavors that will last through the dead of winter. For you and your family, it begins with the vegetables themselves. Cabbage, carrots, cucumbers, onions, and even beets are carefully chosen, cleaned, and sliced before being packed tightly into large ceramic jars. These jars are the storage vessels that will hold the lifeblood of your winter sustenance. The vegetables are then bathed in brine, a solution made of salt and water with just the right amount of vinegar added to ensure preservation. The acidity of the vinegar helps to preserve the vegetables, while the salt works to draw out moisture and keep the vegetables crisp. The brine is poured carefully over the vegetables, ensuring that each piece is submerged, for exposure to air will spoil the batch. The jars are sealed tight, and for the next few weeks, they rest in cool, dark places. As the jars sit in the darkness of the cellar or pantry, something magical begins to happen: fermentation. The vegetables, soaked in brine, begin to ferment naturally. This process is slow but essential. The lactic acid bacteria work their magic, turning the vegetables into tangy, sour, and savory bites that will become a mainstay of your winter diet. Fermentation is a delicate process, one that requires patience. If the jars are left too long, the vegetables could turn mushy, but if they are left for the right amount of time, the tangy crunch that comes with the pickling will perfectly complement the hearty stews and bread you'll eat throughout the season. The anticipation grows as you wait for the pickles to reach their peak. The day finally comes when the pickles are ready. You open the jar and are greeted by the sharp, tangy smell of pickled cabbage, the faintest hint of vinegar dancing on the air. You take a bite, and the crunch of the vegetables fills your mouth, the sourness of the brine balancing beautifully with the savory flavors of the root vegetables. It's a taste of summer captured in a jar, a reminder that the harvest is never truly gone. The pickles will last through the worst of the winter, providing you with a burst of flavor when the blandness of dried meat and preserved grains begins to wear thin. They are a testament to your family's ability to use every part of the harvest, ensuring that no part of the land is wasted. As you walk through the village, the sight of sacks of grain fills your eyes with reassurance. Wheat, barley, Rye, these are the building blocks of your survival. For without grain, without the ability to grind, bake, and cook, you would have nothing. You would be left to face the endless winter with little more than what nature provides in a bare landscape. Grains are the first thing harvested, the first to be gathered. The fields are stripped bare as the final crops are reaped, and you take them in bundles, stacking them in the barns, carefully separating the grains from the chaff. The process is long and tedious. Each ear of wheat must be carefully cut and threshed, the grain separated from the straw. It is an art of patience, a skill honed through generations. Once harvested and threshed, the grains are stored in sacks or wooden bins, kept safe from pests and moisture. Mice and rats are a constant threat, and so care is taken to seal the sacks tightly to ensure no hungry rodents can nibble away at your store. The grains must be kept in a dry, cool place, the barn or cellar, where they will remain safe and dry until the day comes when they are needed. It's a quiet relief, knowing that you've ensured enough flour, enough grains, to last you through the darkest days. As you prepare for winter, you cannot help but think of the fire. The hearth is the beating heart of the home, the source of warmth, the place where food is cooked and where families gather. Without fire, there is no life in winter, just cold, empty space. You can never have enough firewood. The task of gathering and cutting wood is relentless. The forest becomes your second home as you venture deep into its heart, the axe swinging rhythmically with each strike. The sound of wood splitting echoes through the trees, the smell of pine and birch filling the air. You stack the wood in neatly arranged piles, organizing it according to size. The smaller twigs are kept for kindling, while the larger logs are set aside for the heaviest of cold nights. As the biting cold of winter begins to grip the land, the first line of defense for the people of the Slavic heartlands is their home. These structures, built from the earth itself and the trees that surround them, serve as sanctuaries from the brutal elements. There is a certain primal connection between the people and their homes, a bond forged by the struggle for warmth, safety, and survival. The architecture of these homes is not just functional. It's an intimate reflection of the natural world around them. In the villages, small and large alike, the primary materials used to build homes were wood, earth, and thatch. These humble resources, though simple, were more than sufficient to stand up against the freezing cold and snow that would descend on the land. The people had learned through centuries of trial and error how to make the most of what they had, to use the environment to their advantage. The wooden house, or chata, was the most common structure in the Slavic countryside. These homes were built with logs that were felled from the surrounding forests. The logs, often pine, oak, or spruce, were carefully selected, and once felled, they were trimmed, shaped, and laid on top of each other to form the walls of the house. The logs were often notched at the ends to fit together tightly, and this interlocking technique helped prevent the wind from seeping through the gaps. Inside these homes, the air was thick with the smell of fresh wood and the warmth of the fire that burned at the center. The walls, though simple, provided an impressive degree of insulation. The thickness of the logs offered a barrier against the cold, while the natural resin in the wood acted as a further deterrent to drafts. Still, the most crucial element of the wooden house was its central hearth. The hearth wasn't just a fireplace, it was the beating heart of the home. Every family gathered around the hearth to cook, to warm themselves, and to socialize. Without the hearth, the house would be nothing more than a cold, empty shell. The Slavic people didn't just rely on the wood of the house itself. They took measures to improve insulation. Often, a layer of clay or mud would be applied to the outside of the logs, helping to seal any cracks and prevent the cold from creeping in. The roof, too, was designed with warmth in mind. Thatch was the most common material used for roofing. Bundles of straw or reeds were woven tightly together to form a waterproof barrier against the rain and snow. The layers of thatch, although not as sturdy as wood, provided an additional layer of insulation, trapping warm air inside and helping the house retain heat. In areas where wood was scarce or the climate harsher, the Slavic people turned to earth shelters for protection. These homes, often referred to as dugouts or earth huts, were built by digging into the ground to take advantage of the earth's natural insulating properties. The deeper you dug, the more the earth would naturally buffer against the extreme cold, creating a stable temperature inside that would remain relatively constant, even when the temperatures outside plummeted. Building an earth shelter was no easy task. The walls of these homes were often reinforced with wooden beams, and the roofs were constructed from layers of sod, thatch, or even logs, depending on the resources available. The earth shelter, though simpler in form, was remarkably effective at keeping the cold at bay. The dugout provided a refuge from the wind, and the thick layers of earth helped to regulate the internal temperature. One of the most notable features of earth shelters was their ability to retain heat. Unlike the wooden houses, which could lose warmth quickly through the walls, the earth shelters maintained a comfortable temperature even during the coldest nights. The heat from the fire in the central hearth would warm the air, and the earth would act as a passive heat sink, drawing the warmth into the ground and preventing it from escaping. Earth shelters were an ideal solution for winter survival, as they created a stable, warm environment that was resistant to the drastic temperature swings outside. No matter the materials used to build the walls of the house, the roof was arguably the most important element of shelter. The thatched roof, made from bundles of straw, reeds, or grass, was both an art and a necessity. The layers of thatch were tightly packed and carefully woven to form a waterproof barrier that could withstand the heaviest snowstorms and rain. The process of thatching was painstaking, as the layers had to be thick enough to insulate the home, yet flexible enough to shed water and snow. Thatched roofs were particularly effective at insulating against the cold. The natural material had an air pocket between each layer, which trapped heat within the house. While not as durable as a wooden or metal roof, the thatched roof had the distinct advantage of being lightweight, easy to repair, and relatively inexpensive. For many Slavic families, a thatched roof was the ideal solution to keep out the elements while providing insulation during the long winter months. What truly sets Slavic shelter apart from other homes built in harsher climates is their adaptability. The materials used in construction, wood, earth, and thatch, were all locally sourced, which meant that the homes could be rebuilt or repaired quickly if necessary. This made them well suited for the ever-changing seasons, and especially for the unpredictable winters. These homes were also built with an eye toward sustainability. The thatch, wood, and earth used in construction were renewable resources, and the people relied heavily on the surrounding environment to maintain their homes. Each house was a testament to the community's resilience and ability to adapt to the challenges of nature. Once the house itself was built, The next challenge was to ensure that it stayed warm during the long, bitter months of winter. Insulating the home against the cold was just as important as the construction itself, and the Slavic people had perfected this art through generations of trial and error. In Slavic homes, the hearth and central stove were more than just sources of heat. They were integral to daily life. The stove was built into the very heart of the home, often a large brick or clay structure, situated in the middle of the house or at one end. The stove was designed to hold heat for long periods, radiating warmth throughout the house. Central stoves, often referred to as catchels, were typically fueled by wood. The stove would be built with a series of flues, which directed the smoke and gases into a chimney or out through the roof. This design ensured that the fire would burn cleanly, while the heat could be distributed efficiently throughout the room. The stove itself was built with thick brick or clay walls, which absorbed heat and slowly released it into the house, keeping the temperature comfortable even when the fire was not actively burning. The central stove also served as the cooking area. It had a large flat surface on top, where meals were prepared, and below, a firebox where the wood would burn. The heat from the stove would warm the entire room, making it the perfect place to gather around in the evening. The stove was the centerpiece of the home, providing warmth, cooking space, and a social hub where the family could spend time together. During the long, cold nights, the family would gather around the stove, talking, sharing stories, or simply enjoying the warmth. It was in these moments around the fire that much of the community bond was forged. While the central stove was a vital part of larger homes, smaller cottages or homes without central stoves relied on a traditional hearth. The hearth was an open fire pit, usually located in the center of the main room. It was here that families cooked their meals, heated water, and gathered to stay warm. The hearth was the heart of the home literally and figuratively. The hearth was not just a source of heat, it was a symbol of family and security. It was the gathering place for the entire household, where the fire burned and the warmth spread. Families would huddle close to the hearth in the evenings, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, their breath visible in the cold air. The hearth was where food was prepared, where clothing was mended, and where stories were shared. The construction of the hearth was crucial to its effectiveness. It had to be carefully built to ensure that the fire could burn hot enough to provide warmth, yet not so hot that it would consume the wood too quickly. In many homes, the hearth was also used for drying clothes, as the heat from the flames would quickly dry wet garments, ensuring that they would be ready for the next day. While the wood, earth, and thatch of the house provided the basic structure and insulation, it was the addition of animal pelts and thick fabrics that truly made the interior of the home livable during the harshest months. The cold was relentless, and the people of the Slavic heartlands knew that no matter how well the house was constructed, the cold would still seep in unless they took further steps to insulate their homes. One of the primary ways that Slavic people kept themselves warm during the winter was through the use of animal pelts. Fur was one of the most valuable commodities in these cold regions, as it provided unparalleled insulation. Whether it was deer, bear, fox, or rabbit, the pelts of these animals were carefully processed and turned into thick, warm blankets, cloaks, and rugs. In the home, fur blankets were draped over beds and chairs to provide an extra layer of warmth. The fur trapped the body heat of the people who lay beneath it, keeping them warm through the coldest nights. Fur cloaks were also essential, as they provided warmth during the day when the family ventured outside to tend to chores or gather firewood. Fur was also used to line the inside of the home, particularly in areas where the cold was most likely to penetrate around doors and windows. These fur-lined gaps helped to create a barrier against the wind and snow that would often find its way inside, even into the best-built homes. In addition to animal pelts, thick fabrics such as wool were used extensively in Slavic homes. Wool is a natural insulator, and its thick, fibrous structure traps heat close to the body. Woolen blankets, shawls, and carpets were essential to maintaining warmth, and families took great care in producing these items. Wool was often hand-woven, and the fabrics were tightly knit to ensure that no cold air could pass through. These textiles were often dyed in rich colors, adding warmth not only physically but also aesthetically, filling the home with a sense of coziness and life. Woolen clothing was also essential for the survival of the people during the coldest months. Layered woolen tunics, cloaks, and boots provided protection against the elements, allowing people to venture into the snow and ice to complete necessary tasks. The warmth of the wool against the skin was comforting, and the layered garments could be adjusted depending on the weather, ensuring that the person remained warm without overheating. The Slavic home, with its wood, earth, and thatch, was not just a refuge from the cold, it was a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the people who built it. The homes were designed with the long term in mind, constructed from materials that could be easily repaired and renewed when necessary. The use of renewable resources like wood, earth, and straw meant that families could continue to rebuild or maintain their homes year after year. These homes, while simple, were incredibly effective at providing warmth, safety, and comfort through even the harshest winters. The ingenuity of the Slavic people in designing homes that could withstand the extreme cold of their environment speaks to their deep understanding of the natural world around them. Every element, from the structure of the home to the clothing and bedding, was crafted with the goal of survival in mind. As the fires crackle in the hearth and the snow falls silently outside, the Slavic people know that their homes are more than just shelters. They are a reflection of their connection to the land, a testament to their ingenuity, and a vital part of their survival. The Slavic home, with its wood, earth, and thatch, stood as an enduring symbol of the people's connection to the land and their ability to adapt to the extreme challenges of their environment. In every beam, every layer of clay, and every thatched roof, there was a story of survival, resilience, and an unwavering relationship with the earth that provided the resources necessary to endure the harshest seasons. These homes were not built for just a single generation. They were designed to last, to evolve, and to be rebuilt when necessary, ensuring the survival of families year after year. The materials used were renewable, sustainable, and locally sourced wood from the surrounding forests, earth from the soil, and straw from the harvest. This was a system that allowed families to maintain their homes even when resources were scarce and the cold pressed in from all sides. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Slavic home was its sustainability. The materials chosen for construction were not just practical, they were intentionally selected for their renewability. Wood, earth, and thatch were materials that could be replenished. If a tree fell, new saplings could be planted. The land, after all, was both a provider and a partner, and the Slavic people respected this relationship. Wood was used for the framework of the house and the central stove, And it was not just a building material, but an integral part of the living environment. Throughout the year, families would go into the forest to collect fallen branches, prune trees, and harvest wood for the coming winter. But they did not take more than they needed. A sustainable harvest meant that trees were allowed to regenerate and grow back, ensuring a steady supply of wood for generations to come. Similarly, earth was used for the walls, where the dense, protective layers of mud and clay helped seal out the cold and the wind. Earth was everywhere, beneath their feet, around their walls, and even in the very structure of the home. The clay used for the walls could easily be reworked, allowing families to repair and replace sections as needed. If a wall cracked or a structure became damaged by the harsh winds or snow, the repair process was straightforward. It required little more than the clay that lay beneath their feet, mixed with a bit of straw for reinforcement. Thatch, the most vulnerable of the materials, was also renewable. Every few years, the thatched roofs were replaced. The process was labor-intensive, but it was a cycle the community embraced. The straw for thatching came from the fields, a byproduct of the harvest. Once the roofs had been stripped, the old straw would be used to line the walls or to add insulation to the ground. Nothing went to waste. The new thatch was expertly laid, layer upon layer, providing the house with another layer of protection against the wind and snow. The renewable nature of the materials used in the construction of these homes meant that families could continually maintain their shelters, even in the face of limited resources. The ability to rebuild, repair, and renew their homes was a core part of the resilience of Slavic communities. These homes were not just structures, they were a vital part of the survival ecosystem. Every year, they adapted, changed, and evolved with the seasons, ensuring that the people inside remained safe and warm. The life of the Slavic home was marked by a rhythm dictated by the seasons. The tasks of maintaining a home were not confined to a single moment, but spread out through the year, with each season requiring different types of attention and care. The cycle of building, repairing, and renewing was not just about survival, it was about thriving in a world that constantly shifted and changed. In the spring and summer months, as the weather warmed and the days grew longer, the focus shifted to gathering resources. Wood was felled and processed, the earth was tended, and the thatch from previous years was replaced. But it was also a time of preparation. The family would repair the hearth, checking the chimney for any cracks that might allow smoke to escape. The stoves and ovens would be cleaned and inspected, ensuring that everything was in working order for the coming colder months. The roof would be examined for any wear, and the walls would be checked for signs of cracks or damage. When autumn arrived, the focus turned to stockpiling. Firewood had to be gathered and stored before the first frost, and the house itself needed to be made ready for the coming chill. Any repairs from the summer months would be finalized, and the thatch would be checked and reinforced. The family would also begin the laborious process of sealing windows and doors with animal pelts or cloth to prevent drafts. Once the cold set in, any gaps in the home's insulation could become unbearable, and so every corner, every seam was checked for tightness. Winter was a time of vigilance. With the first snow, the house would be sealed from the cold outside, and the family would huddle close to the hearth. The heavy blankets would be pulled from the storage chest, layered over beds, and fur cloaks would be worn around the house, ensuring warmth during the coldest nights. The home became a refuge from the relentless elements outside. Yet, even in the harshest months, there was an understanding that the cycle would soon begin again. Spring, though distant in the middle of winter, was always on the mind of the Slavic people. They knew that in a few months the thaw would begin. The snow would melt, the birds would return, and the land would awaken once again. And with it, they would begin the cycle of renewal all over again. This adaptability, this constant readiness to change with the seasons, was what ensured their survival. The home, though static in its form, was constantly evolving and adapting to the ever-changing environment. While each family took on the task of maintaining their own home, the process was never a solitary one. The Slavic approach to home building and survival was rooted in community. The sharing of knowledge, resources, and labor was not only practical but essential to the success of the village as a whole. When a family needed assistance with repairs, neighbors would gather together to help. This community spirit was particularly evident when it came time to replace thatched roofs. A whole group of villagers would come together to assist in the thatching process, ensuring that each home was properly prepared for winter. The work was hard and time-consuming, but it was done in the spirit of cooperation, with everyone contributing to the survival of the collective. Families would also share their knowledge of home maintenance. Older generations passed down the techniques of building, insulating, and repairing homes. The younger generations learned the art of thatching, the correct ways to treat wood and earth, and the most effective methods for ensuring that the home would remain warm throughout the winter. It was a living tradition, a shared responsibility that bound the village together. In this way, the home was not just a private refuge. It was a part of the larger community fabric. It was a microcosm of the Slavic way of life, built on mutual support, shared labor, and an unbreakable connection to the land and its resources. The survival of one depended on the survival of all. In the midst of the harsh winters, the people of the Slavic lands faced one of the most daunting tasks of survival: acquiring food. While their homes were well stocked with the fruits of autumn harvests, nothing would sustain them through the dead of winter like the hunt. With nature in its deepest slumber and the land covered by a thick white blanket of snow, the Slavic people relied on their hunting skills and the strength of their domesticated animals to survive. In the bitterly cold months, when the frost bites at your fingertips and the snow piles high, every day becomes a challenge, and food becomes the most precious of resources. Hunting was not just an occasional pastime or a leisurely pursuit in the Slavic lands. It was a matter of life and death. The forests and fields, now blanketed by snow, held within them the potential for survival, but also the reality of scarcity. It was in the stillness of winter that the hunter's craft became crucial, where skill and instinct determined whether a family would have enough to eat or be left to starve. Wild boar, deer, and rabbits were the primary animals hunted during the winter months. The dense forests that once flourished with life in the warmer seasons had transformed into a desolate landscape of snow and ice. But even in this cold wilderness, life still existed. These animals, now scarcer and more elusive, roamed the woods in search of food, making the hunter's task all the more difficult. Yet, despite these challenges, the hunt was an essential part of winter survival. The wild boar was perhaps the most sought-after game in the Slavic forests. Known for its ferocity and intelligence, the wild boar was not an easy target. These creatures, which could weigh up to 300 pounds or more, roamed the thick, snow-covered underbrush in search of acorns, roots, and other forage. Their thick fur and dense bodies made them formidable opponents, but for those who were skilled enough to track and hunt them, the rewards were great. A successful hunt of a wild boar could provide a family with enough meat to last weeks, even months, depending on how the animal was processed. The boar's meat was rich and fatty, perfect for salting, smoking, and preserving in the cold months. Every part of the animal was used. The meat, of course, was the primary source of food, but the fat was rendered into lard, which could be used for cooking, preserving food, or even as a form of candlelight. The bones could be used for tools, such as handles for knives and other implements, while the skin could be used for clothing, shoes, or even blankets. Hunting wild boar in the winter was no small feat. The deep snow made tracking more difficult, and these animals were often found in thick, densely wooded areas, where their size and strength allowed them to push through even the heaviest snowfall. Hunters had to be patient, stealthy, and resourceful, often relying on dogs to help flush the boar out of hiding. Once the boar was cornered, the hunter would use spears, axes, or crossbows to make the kill. Deer, particularly red and roe deer, were another prized catch during the winter months. Unlike the boar, deer were more elusive and relied on their speed and agility to evade hunters. In the thick forests, with the snow crunching beneath the hunter's boots, stalking a deer was a delicate and quiet affair. The deer's keen senses of sight, smell, and hearing made them difficult to track. Yet, like the wild boar, deer provided an excellent source of food. Their lean, tender meat was a welcome addition to the winter diet, and like the boar, every part of the animal had a purpose. Deer hides were used to create clothing, such as fur-lined coats, boots, and mittens, while the antlers could be fashioned into tools or ornaments. The fat from the deer was also valuable, particularly in making soap or for cooking. In the deep winter months, when food stores might be running low, a successful deer hunt could be the difference between comfort and hunger. While larger game like wild boar and deer were the grand prizes of winter hunting, smaller animals, such as rabbits, hares, and pheasants, played an equally important role in ensuring that food was always available. These smaller creatures, though less meaty, were abundant in the forests and fields, particularly in the more rural areas. The hunt for rabbits and hares involved a different set of skills. These animals were nimble, able to dart quickly through the snow, using their speed to evade predators. Hunters used snares, traps, or dogs trained to flush out rabbits from their burrows. These smaller animals were often hunted in groups, and many hunters would work together to surround a particular area, driving the rabbits into waiting nets or snares. Though each rabbit might provide only a small amount of meat, together they could sustain a family through several meals. Rabbits and hares were also easier to process and preserve than larger animals. Their meat was often dried or smoked for storage, and the pelts could be used for making warm garments or bedding. Even their bones could be repurposed for use in tools, such as needle and thread holders, or even jewelry. In the Slavic tradition, no part of the hunted animal was ever wasted. Every muscle, bone, hide, and organ had a specific use, a purpose in the survival process. This commitment to using everything was not merely out of respect for the animal, but out of sheer necessity. With limited resources, particularly during the winter months, it was essential to maximize the value of every kill. The primary benefit of hunting large game was the meat it provided. But unlike modern times, when refrigeration was not an option, this meat had to be preserved quickly to prevent spoilage. The Slavic people had perfected methods such as smoking, salting, and drying meat. These preservation methods allowed the meat to last for months, even through the coldest winter when fresh game could be difficult to find. The meat of wild boar, deer, and rabbits would be cut into large chunks, then salted to draw out moisture. The salted meat would be hung in smokehouses or kitchens, where it would be slowly smoked over low-burning wood fires. This process not only preserved the meat but also infused it with rich, earthy flavors. The same meat could be smoked for weeks, and when the family needed a hearty meal, it would be brought down and cooked into stews, roasts, or sausages. In addition to salting and smoking, drying meat was another common preservation method. The meat was cut into thin strips and hung in cool, dry places where the air could circulate and dry the flesh. Dried meat could be stored for months, and while it might lose some of its tenderness, it became a reliable source of protein when fresh meat was unavailable. The bones, antlers, and hooves of animals were invaluable to the Slavic people. These materials could be transformed into tools, weapons, and even decorative items. Bones were carved into handles for knives, axes, and other implements. Antlers were particularly useful, often being fashioned into combs, jewelry, or even tools like hammers and chisels. In some cases, antlers were used to create the frames for sledges or even musical instruments. Even the hooves of animals were not discarded. In the winter months, when other materials were scarce, the hooves could be boiled down to make gelatin or glue, which was used for construction or crafting. This resourcefulness allowed every part of the animal to contribute to the livelihood of the people, reducing waste and maximizing every kill's value. Perhaps the most prized aspect of the hunt was the fur and hides of animals. In the freezing cold of the winter months, warmth was paramount, and animal pelts provided the necessary insulation against the biting cold. The thick fur of wild boars, deer, foxes, and rabbits was processed into clothing, coats, gloves, boots, hats, and blankets. Fur-lined garments were common among the Slavic people, who wore them both in their homes and when they ventured outside to gather firewood or hunt. The hides of larger animals, such as deer and wild boar, were also used to make leather goods. These could include shoes, belts, and sacks for storing grain. The versatility of animal pelts and hides was unmatched, and the skill of tanning and processing these materials was passed down through generations. The careful treatment of fur and leather ensured that they could be used for decades, providing warmth and protection. Even the organs and offal of the hunted animals were used. The hearts, livers, and kidneys were often consumed in stews, offering nutrients that were especially important during the winter months when other sources of fresh vegetables and vitamins were scarce. In some cases, the intestines were cleaned and turned into sausage casings, which could be filled with meat, fat, and spices. These sausages would then be smoked or dried, providing a hearty meal that could last through the coldest months. While hunting was essential for providing food, the domesticated animals that the Slavic people kept also played a critical role in their survival. Cattle, sheep, pigs, and chickens were kept for their milk, wool, meat, and eggs. In the winter, when food and warmth were scarce, Ensuring the health and well-being of livestock became paramount. Livestock could not graze on the snow-covered fields during the winter months. For the Slavic people, this meant storing large quantities of hay and grains before the snow fell. The hay, often harvested in the late summer and early autumn, was stored in barns and sheds, ready to feed the animals through the harshest months. Cattle, sheep, and goats were fed hay in abundance. The hay provided them with the necessary nutrients to sustain them through the winter when fresh grass was unavailable. The grains, barley, oats, and wheat were mixed into their feed to give them additional energy and ensure that they stayed healthy. This was an immense task, as each animal required a steady supply of food to maintain its health. Families would ration the hay and grains carefully, making sure to monitor their animals' consumption and adjust as needed. Beyond food, the shelter of livestock was another crucial concern. Cattle and pigs were kept in barns, where the thick wooden walls provided protection from the wind and snow. The barns were built to trap heat inside, with only small gaps to allow for ventilation. The warmth from the animals' bodies and the bedding of straw or sawdust would keep the interior of the barn relatively warm. Sheep, often the most vulnerable to the cold, were housed in smaller sheds or pens. Thick wool kept them insulated, but the barn itself needed to be insulated as well. Much like human homes, these animal shelters needed regular care and attention. The bedding had to be cleaned and replaced, and the pens needed to be kept dry to prevent illness from spreading. In the cold winter months, when disease could spread quickly, ensuring the health of livestock was critical. Cold temperatures made the animals more susceptible to respiratory illnesses and infections, so regular checks were essential. The livestock needed constant care, and any sign of illness or injury was dealt with immediately. Families kept their animals close, sometimes even bringing the more delicate animals inside the home to shield them from the worst of the cold. When conditions were harsh, farmers would wake early to check on their livestock, making sure they had enough food, water, and warmth to survive until the spring thaw. The challenges of winter were not just limited to the cold. The snow itself created barriers that made hunting and caring for livestock even more difficult. The thick layers of snow that covered the land made tracking animals harder, and the frigid temperatures added layers of complexity to the tasks of daily life. Snow, while beautiful and picturesque, was an obstacle to the hunt. Fresh tracks were often hard to find, as the snow could quickly cover up any signs of animals. Even when tracks were visible, they were often harder to follow. The deep snow made it difficult to maneuver in the forests, slowing hunters down and making the pursuit more dangerous. The cold also made it harder for hunters to stay out for long periods. The freezing temperatures would sap their energy, making it difficult to keep moving and track animals. Even with the best preparations, the hunt in winter was grueling and dangerous, requiring both skill and patience to succeed. The snow and cold posed unique challenges for tending to livestock as well. Every day, farmers had to venture into the snow to ensure that their animals had enough food, water, and shelter. The freezing cold made it difficult to collect water, as even the wells could freeze over. Carrying water to the barns was a laborious task, often requiring several trips a day. Moreover, the snow made it harder to keep the barns warm. Animals' body heat helped to warm the shelter, but during the coldest months, even the best-built barns could become too cold. Farmers had to carefully monitor their livestock, making sure that they were kept dry, well-fed, and free from drafts. The winter months were a time of constant vigilance. Each day brought new challenges, and the ability to adapt to the weather, to work with nature instead of against it, determined whether a family would survive until the thaw. Winter brought with it an aura of stark beauty, a silence that could be felt in the crisp air. But it also brought relentless hardships for the hunters. The deep snow and biting cold, while transforming the land into a shimmering white world, also posed a formidable barrier to those attempting to gather food. Hunting in the winter was an art, one that required patience, ingenuity, and an intimate understanding of both the land and the animals that roamed it. The first challenge that a hunter faced during the winter months was navigating the snow itself. Unlike the warmer months, when animals left clear tracks through the mud or dry ground, the snow provided a deceptive canvas. Fresh tracks, once made by the animals, were quickly covered by subsequent falls, and what was visible on the surface wasn't always a true representation of the animal's movements. A fresh set of tracks might appear in one location, only to vanish as the wind swept through and covered them. This constant battle with the elements required a hunter to not only rely on his knowledge of the terrain, but to also have an almost sixth sense about where animals might be and when to expect them to move. This was where patience was tested most. The Slavic hunters would walk for miles, following subtle signs in the snow-broken twigs, the faintest depression in the snow where an animal might have passed, or even the disturbance of leaves and branches covered with a fresh dusting of snow. They would move quietly through the forest, adjusting their steps to minimize noise, knowing that even the slightest disturbance could send their prey running. But it was more than just tracking. The hunters needed to read the behavior of the animals themselves. With the cold, animals adapted their movements. Some creatures, like deer, tended to move deeper into the forest, where they could find more shelter from the wind. Others, like wild boar, were less afraid of the snow, using the thick cover to their advantage. Knowing the habits of each animal, their patterns, their feeding times, and their migration routes was essential. In the winter, animals would often follow the same paths, making the task of tracking somewhat easier. But it also meant that the hunter had to be one step ahead. They had to predict where the game would be next, taking into account the snow and wind's effect on the landscape. While the hunter's skill was the most important asset, the role of dogs in the winter hunt was indispensable. These loyal companions, bred for the harsh environment, helped flush out game and track it through the dense forest. The dog's sharp senses and high energy allowed them to run ahead, finding the scent of their prey and pushing it into a position where the hunter could make the kill. The relationship between the hunter and his dog was an intimate one, built over years of trust and shared understanding. These dogs were not mere tools, but partners in the hunt. They could track wild boar through thick snow and dense underbrush, and alert the hunter when their prey was near. In return, the dogs were rewarded with scraps of meat or a warm place by the fire after a long day in the cold. Without the assistance of dogs, hunting would have been far more difficult. The animals, often large and quick, required careful coordination between the hunter and his canine companion. The dog's instinctual tracking abilities were honed over generations, passed down as a necessary skill for survival. When a hunter returned to his family with the spoils of the hunt, there was no time for celebration, at least, not until the work was done. A successful kill, whether it was a wild boar, deer, or even a rabbit, was merely the first step in a long process of preservation. The task was far from over, and if anything, it was just beginning. The meat of the animal had to be carefully processed to ensure it would last the winter. The butchering process was a delicate one, requiring skill to ensure every part of the animal was used effectively. A wild boar, for example, was far larger and heavier than a deer, requiring the hunter to carefully cut it into manageable pieces. The meat was first cleaned and separated, with the organs set aside for later use. The bones were carefully extracted, and every part of the animal was considered valuable. The meat itself was either salted, smoked, or dried. Salting was one of the oldest and most trusted methods. The meat was rubbed generously with salt, which drew out moisture and helped preserve it for months. The salted meat was then stored in cool, dry places, often hung from rafters or stored in wooden barrels. Smoking the meat added another layer of flavor and preservation. The meat was slowly smoked in a low, constant fire, the smoke seeping into the fibers of the muscle and creating a protective barrier against bacteria. Dried meat was another essential method of preservation. The meat was sliced thinly and then hung out to dry, usually in a cool, dry space. The drying process helped remove moisture, keeping the meat from spoiling. When properly dried, the meat could be stored for months, providing sustenance when fresh meat was unavailable. The offal of the animal, its organs, blood, and smaller parts were not discarded. They were carefully prepared for use in various dishes. The liver, heart, and kidneys of deer or wild boar were often eaten fresh, cooked into hearty stews. The blood, too, was sometimes used to make blood sausages, a staple food in many Slavic kitchens. The intestines were cleaned and prepared to hold a mixture of ground meat, fat, and spices, making sausages that would be smoked and preserved for future meals. The bones, once stripped of meat, had their own value. Larger bones were used as tools, handles for knives or axes, or even for making jewelry. The marrow inside the bones was carefully extracted and used as a rich addition to stews or as a cooking fat. In some cases, even the hooves were not discarded, as they could be boiled down into gelatin or glue, essential materials for construction or crafting. Hunting, though a crucial part of survival, was not the only challenge the Slavic people faced during the winter. The snow, cold, and treacherous conditions made the task of obtaining food and taking care of livestock incredibly difficult. The cold and snow imposed limitations on the speed and success of the hunt, and it also made it difficult to manage the needs of domesticated animals. The deep snow of winter created a barrier not just to the animals, but also to the hunters. Moving through the thick forest or across open fields was exhausting, and every step became a challenge as the snow sucked at your boots. The weight of the snow, which piled high in some areas, slowed movement and made the terrain difficult to navigate. Even with the best equipment, hunters found themselves fatigued and slowed by the endless snowdrifts. Often, it was necessary to travel long distances to find game, and the bitter cold of winter would drain the hunter's energy quickly. Every trip into the forest was a gamble. Would the snow be too deep? Would the wind make tracking impossible? There were no guarantees. In some years, hunters would return empty-handed, only to face weeks of hunger and despair. The reliance on hunting meant that a single failed hunt could jeopardize the entire family's chances of survival. Livestock were similarly affected by the snow and cold. They could not graze on the frozen ground, and farmers were required to provide feed for their animals. The hay and grain stored in the summer had to be rationed carefully, ensuring that each animal received enough sustenance to make it through the winter. Pigs, cows, and sheep all required their fair share of food, and the snow made it more difficult to transport food from the fields or barns. The cold temperatures also made tending to livestock a difficult task. Farmers had to ensure that their animals were kept in warm, insulated barns where they could protect themselves from the wind and snow. The livestock, particularly cows and sheep, could not remain outside for extended periods without risk of frostbite, illness, or death. Each morning, farmers would go out into the cold, checking on the animals, ensuring they were warm enough and had enough food to survive. Water was another issue. In the winter, rivers and wells froze over, and farmers had to melt snow or bring water from distant sources. It was a time-consuming and labor-intensive task, but it was vital to the survival of the livestock. Without adequate water, the animals could not thrive, and the resources needed to provide it were often scarce. Despite the challenges posed by the snow, the cold, and the limitations of winter hunting, the Slavic people were resilient. Their ability to adapt to the harsh environment, to make do with what they had, and to work together as a community ensured their survival. Each winter, they faced the same trials, and each year, they learned new ways to overcome them. The community-based approach to survival was one of the key factors in overcoming these difficulties. Neighbors would help each other with the hunt, share food when resources were scarce, and work together to ensure that everyone had enough to eat. The bond between families and communities became even more important in the winter, when isolation could mean disaster. Through every winter challenge, the Slavic people were reminded of their connection to the land, to the animals they hunted, and to each other. It was a connection forged in the crucible of survival, a testament to their ingenuity, resourcefulness, and spirit. Section 4. The power of community and social bonds. Unity in survival. In the harsh, unyielding environment of the Slavic winter, where snow buried the earth beneath and the cold seeped through every crack, survival was not a solitary endeavor. The people knew that no matter how well they prepared individually, it was the strength of their community that would truly allow them to endure. Winter, with its long nights and unrelenting frost, tested not only the physical strength of the people, but their bonds with each other. It was during these months, when the world outside was frozen, that the warmth of human connection became the true source of survival. The importance of communal support, collective labor, and shared resources cannot be overstated. It was the very lifeblood of the Slavic people's ability to endure the winter. When the winds howled outside, when the firewood dwindled and the snow piled high, it was the strength of neighbors helping neighbors, of families working together, that ensured that no one would be left behind. The very nature of the Slavic village was built on cooperation. The land was hard, the weather unforgiving, and the resources limited. Every family knew that, to survive the winter, they had to rely not only on their own strength, but on the collective strength of the community. This was not just a matter of friendship or camaraderie. It was a matter of survival. The idea of everyone for themselves had no place in the Slavic village. It was only through unity that they could endure the cold, the isolation, and the scarcity that winter brought. The work began long before the snow fell. The late summer and fall months were spent preparing for the cold, And it was during these months that the seeds of communal cooperation were sown. It was common practice for neighboring families to help each other with the harvesting of crops, the cutting of wood, and the preservation of food. These tasks, though vital, were incredibly time-consuming, and no one could afford to do them alone. By sharing the labor, families ensured that each household would have enough resources to make it through the winter. The act of sharing resources went beyond simply working together. It was about ensuring that no one in the village went without. Food was scarce during the winter, and the stores that had been so carefully built up over the months could be consumed quickly. When one family's food stores were running low, they could rely on their neighbors to share what they had, whether it was a bit of preserved meat, a bundle of hay, or even firewood to keep the stove going. This kind of shared responsibility meant that no one family was ever truly alone in the fight for survival. Hunting in the winter was one of the most difficult and dangerous tasks a family could face. The cold made the hunt harder, and food was not easy to find. It was for this reason that many families, or even entire villages, would come together for communal hunts. When the snow piled up and the land became harder to navigate, it was a community effort to ensure that no one went hungry. Hunters, both skilled and unskilled, would gather and venture into the forest together. The hunt was a highly organized affair. Dogs would be used to help track animals, and the group would split into smaller parties, each working to flush out game from different areas. When a kill was made, the entire group would help to skin and butcher the animal, dividing up the meat among the families who had participated. This was not just a practical arrangement. It was a reflection of the collective spirit of the village. No hunter was left to carry the burden alone. If one family was unable to hunt for themselves due to sickness, injury, or lack of resources, others would step in and ensure they were provided for. Similarly, firewood was gathered as a collective effort. The work of gathering firewood was backbreaking, and as the snow deepened, it became even more difficult to gather enough wood to keep everyone warm. It was common for families to organize wood-gathering expeditions, where groups would head into the forest, cutting down trees and collecting logs to be split and stored. Sometimes, entire villages would take part in this effort, ensuring that everyone had enough fuel for the stoves and hearths. Even when a family's own supply of firewood ran out, they knew they could count on their neighbors to share the resources that had been gathered collectively. This shared labor wasn't just about generosity. It was about ensuring that everyone had what they needed to survive. It was a system of mutual interdependence, a safety net woven from the threads of shared experience and hard work. As winter set in, and the cold became unbearable, the work of ensuring warmth and sustenance continued, with families banding together to face the trials of the season. While the winter months were primarily focused on survival, they also provided an opportunity for the Slavic people to come together as a community and celebrate what they had. Winter festivals and religious rites were integral to the social fabric of the village. These events not only marked important times of the year, but also served as a reminder of the strength of the community and the role that shared beliefs played in maintaining unity. Despite the hardships of the winter months, the people of the Slavic heartlands understood the importance of taking time to come together and celebrate. The long nights and freezing temperatures could easily lead to despair, but festivals allowed people to find joy and warmth in each other's company. These festivals were often tied to the cycles of nature, celebrating the solstice and marking the turning of the year. One of the most important festivals was Kolyada, a Slavic celebration of the winter solstice. This festival was a time for feasting, singing, and dancing, an opportunity to come together and share in the communal spirit. People would dress in elaborate costumes, sometimes representing animals, spirits, or mythical figures, and gather around the fire to sing songs that told the stories of the seasons. The Kolyada festival was deeply tied to the agricultural calendar, a way of honoring the earth's cycle and asking for protection from the harshness of winter. Another significant celebration was Maslenitsa, a festival that marked the end of winter and the beginning of spring. Maslenitsa was a joyful occasion, a time for the community to come together and feast before the long fast of Lent. The festival featured lively games, dancing, and traditional foods, and was often seen as a communal farewell to winter's grip. The highlight of the festival was the burning of the moros, a symbolic representation of winter, marking the end of its cold reign and the return of warmth and life. These festivals were not merely for entertainment. They were vital to maintaining the community's morale. In the dead of winter, when the snow seemed endless and the cold unrelenting, these moments of joy brought light into the dark months, reminding people that they were not alone in their struggles. They reinforced the sense of community and shared purpose that was essential to survival. In addition to festivals, religious rites played an essential role in the community's winter survival. Christianity, particularly in its Eastern Orthodox form, was deeply intertwined with daily life, and the Slavic people used religious observances to come together in prayer and reflection. Christmas, the birth of Christ, was celebrated with great reverence. The holiday was not just a religious occasion, but a deeply communal one. Families would attend church services together, offering prayers for health and prosperity in the year ahead. Afterward, they would return home to share a feast, often featuring foods that had been preserved from the autumn harvest. In addition to the major religious holidays, there were regular rituals and prayers that marked the seasons. Epiphany, the celebration of the baptism of Christ, was another important occasion. It marked a time of spiritual renewal and purification, and the people of the village would come together to pray for the protection and well-being of the community. These religious rites, while rooted in faith, also served to strengthen social bonds, offering comfort and support in the darkest days of winter. Even outside of formal religious observances, the practice of storytelling, folklore, and the recounting of spiritual beliefs served to unite the community. Stories of ancestors, gods, and spirits passed down through generations were shared around the fire, providing a sense of continuity and connection to the past. These stories not only kept alive the cultural heritage, but also offered hope and a sense of purpose to those enduring the harshness of winter. When winter tightened its grip, and the days grew long and the nights colder, there was an unspoken understanding that the social bonds of the community would become the strongest source of warmth. The communal house, the fire, and the shared meal were at the core of these connections. Neighbors would visit each other, checking in, sharing stories, or simply offering help where needed. The act of sharing food, firewood, or labor during these times was more than just generosity. It was a reaffirmation of the unbreakable social contract that bound the village together. A family without enough firewood would receive help from others. A family with less food might find a neighbor knocking at their door with an extra portion of salted meat or a bundle of preserved vegetables. The idea was simple. What one family had, the whole village had, and what one family lacked, the whole village would help provide. At the heart of these gatherings was the sense of collective responsibility. No one was left to fend for themselves. Everyone knew that they were part of something larger, whether it was through sharing the fruits of a successful hunt, gathering firewood, or even sharing in the spiritual and social activities of the festivals. These acts of cooperation ensured that no one would be left behind. In the face of the harshest winters, the power of the community was the strongest weapon the Slavic people had. Each person, whether through their labor, their food, their prayers, or their stories, contributed to the survival of the group as a whole. These unbreakable bonds of togetherness, forged in the fires of shared labor, faith, and survival, were the true backbone of the Slavic people's ability to endure the bitter cold. The mutual support and collective strength made the community more than just a group of individuals. It was a living, breathing entity, one that could face any challenge and emerge stronger on the other side. These social bonds ensured that no one would be abandoned in their time of need. In the deep, silent winters, when the cold seemed unbearable, it was the warmth of human connection that would keep the Slavic people going. In the end, the winter might be long, but the bond of community was unyielding. The fires would burn bright, the music would play, and the village would stand together against the cold. The shared strength of the people would carry them through, and they would emerge from the long nights into the warmth of the coming spring together. As the long, cold winter set in, the Slavic people knew that their strength came not from individual effort but from collective support. Survival during these months was as much about what was shared as what was stored. The concept of communal resources wasn't just about food, it was woven into every aspect of their lives. Shared labor, shared warmth, shared food, and even shared knowledge formed the backbone of the village community. The understanding was simple. When one of us has, we all have. When one of us is in need, we all step in. When the days grew shorter and the freezing winds began to howl through the bare trees, food became the most precious resource. But more important than the individual supplies of each household was the communal nature of food sharing. A family who had an abundance of preserved meats, pickled vegetables, or grains would share with those who had less. This exchange wasn't just a matter of generosity, it was a fundamental aspect of the social structure. Without it, no one could survive. In a time when fresh food was scarce, families would share what they had with others, ensuring that all would be able to survive the winter. Those with the largest stockpiles of food might have a little more to eat, but the notion that a family should go hungry when there were extra provisions in the village was unthinkable. The cycle of sharing wasn't one-sided either. It was reciprocal. If a family was struggling to provide enough firewood or preserve enough food, they could count on their neighbors to help. In return, they would offer their assistance once they were able, whether by giving food when they had excess or by offering labor. Perhaps a family would help another with hunting or gathering firewood, and in return, they could count on shared resources from that family when their stores ran low. This cycle of reciprocity was the foundation of village life. It wasn't just about helping others out of charity. It was about ensuring the survival of the group as a whole. Every household knew that at any given moment, they could depend on the kindness of their neighbors and that their own help would be needed in return. This mutual dependency was what allowed the village to thrive, even in the harshest winters. Beyond food, another shared resource essential to winter survival was firewood. During the coldest months, when wood was the only source of heat, sharing firewood became as vital as sharing food. In some villages, firewood gathering became a communal event. The need to cut down trees and prepare firewood was relentless, especially since each home required a significant amount of fuel to keep warm. Families would often work together to gather the necessary firewood. This wasn't just for convenience. It was the only way to ensure that everyone had enough. The labor was heavy and tiring, and there was no time for individuals to gather all the wood they needed on their own. Whether it was through organizing collective trips to the forest or pooling resources for woodcutting tools, communities made sure that each family had enough firewood to keep their homes warm. Similarly, when one household ran out of firewood and had nothing to burn, neighbors stepped in. A stack of firewood wasn't simply a commodity, it was a lifeline. The act of sharing firewood symbolized the very essence of Slavic communal living. Even in the harshest of times, a village that cared for each other ensured that the fire would never go out. Amid the relentless cold, the Slavic people understood the necessity of maintaining social bonds. Winter could be a long, isolating time, and the heavy snow could keep families isolated from one another for days at a time. That's where communal gatherings, festivals, and religious rites came in. These were more than just entertainment. They were vital to maintaining the health of the social fabric. They helped to reinforce the sense of unity, reminded people of the importance of communal living, and provided a momentary escape from the grind of daily survival. One of the highlights of the Slavic winter was the festival of Maslenitsa, a celebration that marked the end of winter and the beginning of spring. Though Maslenitsa was centered on the anticipation of warmer days, it served as an important time of bonding between families, friends, and the larger village community. Maslenitsa, also known as Pancake Week, was a time of feasting, dancing, and revelry. It marked the last chance to enjoy the rich foods that had been preserved throughout the winter, from hearty stews to, of course, pancakes made from buckwheat flour, a staple in the Slavic diet. The festival was filled with music, singing, and traditional dances, where people would gather to share food, laughs, and stories. The festivities brought warmth not just to the body, but to the spirit, reminding people of the community's strength and the hope of the coming spring. The burning of the Moros, the symbolic representation of winter, was one of the highlights of the festival. The effigy, made from straw and dressed in old clothes, was set alight in a huge bonfire, symbolizing the end of winter's grasp and the arrival of warmer, fertile months. This ritual, though it may have seemed simple, carried deep significance. It was an act of renewal, a communal release of the hardships endured, and a collective marking of the passing of time. In addition to the physical activities of survival, religion played a critical role in maintaining the community bond during winter. Religious services offered both spiritual solace and social unity. The Slavic people, deeply rooted in the traditions of Eastern Orthodoxy, observed several important religious holidays throughout the winter, with Christmas being the most significant. Christmas, or Christos Roždayetsia, was celebrated with great reverence. It was not just a religious holiday. It was also a time for families to come together and give thanks for the strength they had found in each other throughout the year. The holiday began with church services, where families would gather to pray for health, prosperity, and protection through the cold months. The sense of shared purpose in these services brought the community together, allowing them to collectively bear the weight of winter's harshness. In the days leading up to Christmas, many villages would hold koladi, a series of caroling and religious songs that echoed through the streets. These were not just songs of merriment, but hymns and prayers that reinforced the communal ties, reminding everyone of the shared spirit of unity, faith, and resilience. In this way, even in the coldest, darkest months, the Slavic people found warmth in their collective faith. In the communal setting of a Slavic village, the elderly were revered not just for their wisdom, but for their role in holding the community together. They were the storytellers, the keepers of traditions, and the ones who ensured that younger generations understood the importance of working together. Their role was crucial, especially during the winter months when isolation threatened to weaken the social bonds. Elders were often the ones who would organize communal gatherings, direct collective tasks like firewood cutting, and lead prayers during religious festivals. They passed on vital survival skills to the younger generation, from preparing food to preserving meat and hunting. But their role was also to remind the villagers of the importance of togetherness, of the collective strength of the village. Through storytelling, the elderly kept the history of the village alive. Tales of past winters, of families who had survived through adversity, of how the village had come together to overcome hardship, were shared around the hearths in the evenings. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were vital lessons about endurance and community. In a world where survival was never guaranteed, these stories strengthened the belief that no matter how difficult the challenge, the village would persevere together. Through every hardship, from the bitter cold and harsh winds to the scarcity of food and firewood, the Slavic people knew that their strength lay in their unity. The long winter nights tested their endurance, but also cemented their reliance on each other. No matter how tough the weather became, no matter how much the cold pressed in, there was always warmth in the shared labor, the communal gatherings, and the shared meals. It was through these acts that the Slavic people were able to survive the most extreme conditions. The bond between families and neighbors was more than just a matter of necessity. It was a matter of survival. The notion of one for all and all for one became the driving force of Slavic life during winter. It wasn't enough to simply prepare on one's own. The village was an interconnected web, with each thread supporting the others. The people knew that the survival of the village as a whole meant that each individual's survival was intertwined with the rest. In the darkest months, when the world outside seemed a vast, unyielding stretch of snow and ice, the warmth of the community was the greatest source of light. It was the sense of shared purpose, shared responsibility, and collective action that allowed the Slavic people to not just survive the winter, but to emerge from it stronger, more unified, and more connected. As the cold winds swept over the frozen landscapes of the Slavic heartlands, the people turned not just to the physical preparations of survival, but to their deep spiritual beliefs and rituals to guide them through the darkness of winter. The months between the first frost and the thawing spring were a time of hardship, isolation, and trepidation. In a world that felt vast, cold, and unrelenting, the spiritual practices of the Slavic people provided not only protection and hope, but a sense of control in a world often beyond human influence. Winter, with its long nights and short days, was a time when the veil between the known world and the supernatural was believed to be thin. For the Slavic people, the winter months were a time to reinforce their connection with the natural world and to honor the spirits, gods, and ancestors who played such an important role in their lives. At the heart of Slavic spirituality was a deep respect for the natural world and the belief that it was inhabited by powerful spirits. These spirits, both benevolent and malevolent, could influence the lives of the people, especially during the cold months when nature itself seemed to be at its harshest. The long nights, the cold winds, and the lack of sunlight were seen as the domain of these spirits, and the rituals of the Slavic people were designed to both appease and protect from them. Winter was believed to be the time when the evil spirits, the Morosko, Father Frost, Cupola, and Koshchei, were most active, and protective rituals became a fundamental part of the seasonal calendar. The Slavic people sought to drive these spirits away, to banish their harmful influence, and to ensure that the coming spring would be bountiful. One of the primary concerns of the Slavic people during the winter months was the protection of their homes, families, and animals from the evil spirits that roamed the earth in search of mischief. In the bitter cold, it was believed that malevolent forces could sneak into homes through cracks in the walls, the space beneath the door, or the chimney areas that were seen as vulnerable. To ward off these spirits, the Slavic people employed a variety of rituals, from placing protective symbols above doorways to burning incense and herbs in the home to cleanse the air. The use of smoke in Slavic spiritual practices was central to their rituals of protection. The scent of burning herbs, such as sage, juniper, and mugwort, was believed to cleanse the air of negative energy and spirits. Smoke would rise from the hearth, carrying with it the prayers and wishes of the people as they gathered around the warmth of the fire. During winter, these herbal smokes would be used not just in homes, but also around barns and stables to keep livestock safe from illness and spirits alike. In particular, juniper berries were seen as an important tool for warding off evil spirits. Sprigs of juniper were often hung around doorways and placed under beds, with the belief that the scent of the berries would repel dark forces, ensuring that no spirit could enter the home. This belief was deeply tied to the idea that the natural world, with its plants and animals, had spiritual power that could protect the people. Ancestor worship was another critical aspect of Slavic spirituality. During the winter, when the nights were long and the days short, the Slavic people took the time to honor their ancestors, believing that the spirits of the dead could be called upon for guidance, protection, and blessings. Special prayers were said, and offerings were made in the homes, particularly at the hearth, where the warmth of the fire symbolized the connection between the living and the dead. Families would set aside food, often bread, milk, and grains, to be offered at the family altar or outside in the yard. These offerings were meant to appease the spirits of the ancestors, asking them for protection and help in getting through the long, harsh winter. It was believed that if the ancestors were properly honored, they would provide warmth and protection, ensuring that the living would not suffer from famine or disease. Another critical element of Slavic winter spirituality was the use of protective amulets and symbols. These objects were believed to hold magical properties and to offer protection from malevolent spirits and forces. One of the most common amulets was the kolovrat, a symbol of the sun, which represented the eternal cycle of life and death. It was worn around the neck or placed in homes to ensure that the household would remain safe from harm. Additionally, horseshoes were often hung above doorways, as they were believed to be a powerful symbol of protection against evil spirits. The shape of the horseshoe, with its open end facing upward, was thought to trap and contain the spirits, preventing them from entering the home. In some regions, people would also carve symbols of protection on their doorways or on the walls of their homes, creating a spiritual shield to keep the cold and the spirits at bay. While the winter months were often filled with rituals meant to ward off evil spirits and ensure protection, they also held a sacred space for celebration. Festivals during this time were both a spiritual and social necessity, providing a break from the hardships of survival and an opportunity to reconnect with community and faith. These festivals were rooted in ancient traditions, many of which predate Christianity, and were tied to the cycles of nature, particularly the return of the Sunday. The most significant festival of winter was the celebration of the winter solstice, marking the longest night of the year and the point at which the sun would begin its return. For the Slavic people, the winter solstice was a deeply sacred time, as it symbolized the victory of light over darkness. The sun god, Dajbog, was honored during this time, as his return was seen as the harbinger of spring and renewal. The winter solstice was celebrated with great festivities. Bonfires were lit, symbolizing the sun's return and the light that would soon fill the days. People danced around the fires, singing songs of praise to Dajbog, offering their hopes for a bountiful harvest, a healthy year, and protection from the lingering cold. In some regions, effigies of winter were created and burned, symbolizing the defeat of the long, dark days and the welcoming of the new light. Dajbog, the Slavic sun god, was believed to ride across the sky in a chariot of fire, bringing warmth and light to the world. His return was eagerly awaited, as the people knew that with his return, the days would begin to lengthen, the ice would melt, and the earth would once again be fertile. In this sense, the winter solstice was not just a celebration of the return of light, it was a symbolic rebirth, a reminder that no matter how harsh the winter, the sun would always come back. While Dajbog represented the sun, the goddess Mokosh was honored during the winter as the earth goddess, the protector of fertility and the harvest. Mokosh's role was especially important during the cold months when the earth lay dormant beneath the snow. She was believed to be the guardian of the earth's cyclical nature, ensuring that life would return when the thaw came. Rituals dedicated to Mokosh focused on invoking her blessings for the fertility of the land and the well-being of the community. In winter, her symbols were often displayed on altars, and offerings of grain, bread, and honey were left outside to ensure her favor. These offerings were made not just for the sake of the harvest, but also to protect the family and ensure that they would be able to withstand the hardships of the winter. In some Slavic villages, women would gather together in the early winter to perform rituals to honor Mokosh, offering prayers for the health of the land and the prosperity of their families. As the end of winter neared, the Slavic people celebrated Maslenitsa, a festival that marked the final days of winter and the coming of spring. This festival was centered around the symbolic burning of the Moros, an effigy that represented the harshness of winter. The burning of the Moros symbolized the defeat of winter's cold grip and the welcoming of the warmth of spring. Maslenitsa was not just a festival of spiritual significance, but a joyful time for socializing and feasting. The festival was marked by the cooking of blini pancakes, which symbolized the Sunday The round shape of the pancakes was a representation of the sun's return, and the people would gather to eat, dance, and celebrate. The highlight of the festival was the communal bonfire, where the Moro's effigy would be set alight, signaling the end of winter and the beginning of a new season. During the long, dark months of winter, the Slavic people relied heavily on folklore to provide comfort, to explain the mysteries of the world around them, and to offer a sense of continuity. Stories of gods, spirits, and ancestors were passed down through generations, and these tales not only provided entertainment, but also psychological resilience. They reminded the people that they were not alone, that they were part of a long tradition, and that the world would eventually warm again. One of the most enduring figures in Slavic winter folklore is Morosko, or Father Frost. Morosko was believed to be the spirit of winter, a cold, icy figure who would bring frost and snow. But he was also a character of dual nature. While he could be harsh and unforgiving, bringing death to those unprepared for the cold, he could also be benevolent, offering protection and blessings to those who respected him. Morosko was often depicted as a powerful, otherworldly figure who controlled the snow and ice. He could be cruel, but he was also seen as a purifier, for it was through his cold that the land would be cleansed, ready for the spring. The folklore around Morosko portrayed him as a guardian of winter, reminding the people of the necessary balance between life and death, warmth and cold. His tales carried the underlying message of resilience. To survive winter was to endure hardship and to come out stronger, for spring would always return. In addition to the stories of gods and spirits, the Slavic people also told stories of humans who triumphed over great adversity. One of the most famous legends is that of Vasilisa the Beautiful, a tale of a young woman who faces hardship but ultimately prevails. Her story, filled with magic, mystery, and the triumph of good over evil, became a symbol of hope during the darkest days of winter. Vasilisa's journey was one of resilience, much like the people themselves. The story resonated with the Slavic people, particularly during the winter months, as it echoed the struggles of daily life. It was a reminder that, like Vasilisa, they could endure the trials of winter, face the cold and darkness, and emerge victorious. The stories of these heroes offered a sense of connection to a larger world, one where the struggle against winter's cold was not just a physical battle, but a spiritual one as well. As the long winter months dragged on, the rituals, festivals, and folklore of the Slavic people provided more than just comfort. They provided strength. The connection to the divine, the respect for nature's cycles, and the understanding that each winter would pass allowed the people to face the challenges of the season with resolve. Through their rituals, they reinforced the idea that winter was not just a time of suffering, but a time of spiritual renewal, a time to reconnect with the earth, with ancestors, and with each other. Winter festivals like Maslenitsa and the solstice celebrations were about more than welcoming spring. They were about reaffirming the resilience of the human spirit. These rituals and festivals bound the community together, offering a sense of purpose and hope in the darkest of times. Through these shared experiences, the people not only endured winter but celebrated the connection to the land and the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In the end, it was not just the warmth of the hearth or the food in their bellies that kept the Slavic people going during the winter. It was the hope, the faith, and the unity forged in the coldest months that made them resilient, ensuring that they would always emerge from the darkness stronger and more connected than before. While Slavic winter rituals focused on warding off malevolent spirits and honoring nature's forces, there was also a deep spiritual connection with the ancestors. The Slavic people, like many cultures, viewed the dead not as distant entities but as active participants in the daily life of the living. The dead were considered to walk among the living during certain times of the year, especially during winter, when the veil between the two worlds was believed to be thinner. It was during these long winter months, particularly around the time of the winter solstice, that families would honor their ancestors most diligently. As the cold winter nights stretched long, the Slavic people turned to their ancestors for guidance, protection, and blessings. In the dim light of winter, the family hearth became a sacred place for offering tribute to those who had passed. Ancestor worship was deeply rooted in Slavic spiritual practices, with rituals designed to ensure that the spirits of the dead were at peace, keeping malevolent forces at bay. The winter months, particularly around Kolyada, the winter solstice, were an ideal time for these ancestral offerings. The people believed that during this time, the spirits of the dead were most likely to return and visit their living relatives. The souls of ancestors, it was thought, could offer protection, wisdom, and insight, but they also required offerings to remain content and not return as vengeful spirits. The ritual of Rodnovery, ancestor worship, was carefully observed. Families would set out simple offerings of food, such as bread, milk, and fruit, placing them near the hearth or in the yard to honor their ancestors. In many cases, offerings were also left at the family's sacred tree or by the grave sites of the deceased. The food, symbolic of sustenance and respect, was left with the belief that the spirits would return in the quiet of the night to partake in the offerings. These simple acts helped reinforce the living's connection to their roots and assured that the ancestors were watching over the community. In addition to the more formal ancestor worship rituals, certain spirits were revered as guardians of the family. These were often the spirits of the family's most revered ancestors, believed to offer direct protection. These spirits were thought to guide the living, ensuring safe journeys, healthy crops, and, most critically during winter, protection from the deadly cold and the dangerous creatures that roamed the dark forests. One particular type of ancestor spirit, domovoi, was considered the protector of the household. This spirit, believed to be the soul of a long-dead ancestor, was seen as a guardian of family life and prosperity. The domovoi was thought to dwell near the stove or hearth, guarding the family's well-being, and could be both benevolent and mischievous. When the family treated the domovoi with respect, offering small gifts and prayers, the spirit would protect them. However, disrespecting or neglecting the domovoi could bring misfortune, bad harvests, or illness. During the long winter nights, the domovoi's presence was especially important. The freezing cold and isolation of winter left families vulnerable, and the domovoi was seen as a comforting and guiding force that ensured the family was cared for. On cold nights, families would leave extra bread and butter near the hearth, offering it to the domovoi as a sign of respect, hoping to ensure peace and prosperity for the coming year. Winter festivals in Slavic culture were more than just celebrations of the turning of the year. They were spiritual events that marked the rebirth of the sun, the renewal of life, and the enduring cycle of nature. The darkest days of winter were seen not only as a time of hardship, but as a natural part of a cycle, one that would inevitably give way to spring. Through these festivals, The people connected deeply to their beliefs about the natural world and the divine forces that governed it. One of the most important and spiritually significant winter festivals in the Slavic world was Kolyada, which centered around the winter solstice and the return of the Sunday. It was a celebration of the sun's victory over the darkness of winter, marking the moment when the days would begin to grow longer again. The holiday had deep roots in Slavic paganism, and even after the spread of Christianity, elements of the celebration persisted. Kolyada was a festival of rebirth and renewal, drawing its power from the sun, which was revered as a god in many Slavic communities. Dashbog, the sun god, was believed to ride across the sky in a golden chariot, bringing warmth and light to the world. During Kolyada, families would light bonfires to symbolize the sun's return, and large groups of people would gather to celebrate around the fire. The lighting of these fires was seen as a purification ritual, burning away the darkness and cold and making way for the renewal of life. One of the most important customs during Kolyada was caroling, a practice that involved going from house to house, singing songs of praise to the sun god, and wishing health and prosperity for the coming year. The carolers, often dressed in costumes representing different animals, spirits, or deities, would receive food and drink in exchange for their blessings. This was a communal celebration, a chance for the people to come together and reaffirm their connection to each other and the forces of nature. Kolyada was not just a social gathering but a spiritual event. Through music, dance, and rituals, the Slavic people would come together to honor Dashbog and ask for his protection and blessing for the year to come. They celebrated the return of the sun as a symbol of hope, and as the fires burned brightly in the cold, they were reminded that no matter how harsh the winter, spring would always follow. While Kolyada focused on the return of the sun, Maslenitsa marked the final days of winter and the arrival of spring. It was a joyous festival that embraced the warmth of the sun and celebrated the end of winter's harsh grip. Maslenitsa was a time for feasting, singing, dancing, and celebrating with friends and family. The highlight of Maslenitsa was the symbolic burning of the effigy, called the moros or winter, which represented the cold, harsh season. The effigy was typically made of straw and old clothing, and it was paraded through the village before being set ablaze in a huge bonfire. The burning of the moros was a ritual cleansing, marking the end of winter's power and the welcoming of the warmth and fertility of spring. Maslenitsa was also known for its traditional foods, particularly blini, a type of pancake made from buckwheat flour. The round shape of the blini symbolized the sun, and eating them was seen as a way to absorb the sun's energy, preparing for the return of the growing season. The festivities were filled with music, laughter, and dancing, and the entire community would come together to celebrate the shared sense of renewal that Maslenitsa symbolized. This festival was not only an expression of joy but also a collective acknowledgement of the cycles of nature. It was a time to mark the passing of winter, a time of hardship, and to honor the promise of spring, a time of growth and renewal. Maslenitsa was both a spiritual and social event, bringing people together to celebrate their survival and the coming of a new season. While rituals and festivals were central to the Slavic people's survival through the winter, the power of folklore also played a significant role in providing psychological resilience. In the harshest months, when the days were short and the nights stretched on forever, The stories of old tales of gods, spirits, and heroes provided comfort, a connection to the past, and hope for the future. Storytelling was one of the most cherished traditions during the long winter nights. Families would gather around the hearth, the firelight casting flickering shadows on the walls, and share tales that had been passed down for generations. These stories were not just for entertainment. They were a means of preserving culture, transmitting knowledge, and reinforcing the values of the community. One of the most beloved stories was that of Morosco, or Father Frost. Morosco was a spirit who represented winter, a god who could either bless or curse the people depending on how they treated him. Some stories depicted him as a cruel figure, sending snowstorms and biting winds, while others portrayed him as a benevolent guardian, offering warmth to those who respected him. The stories of Morosco were reminders of the harshness of winter, but they also reinforced the notion that nature, in all its forms, was not to be feared but respected. Another popular tale was that of Vasilisa the Beautiful, a young woman who, through perseverance, wit, and the help of magical forces, overcame great adversity. Vasilisa's tale was one of resilience, and it offered hope to those who were struggling to survive the brutal winters. The story of Vasilisa reinforced the importance of endurance, the power of kindness, and the belief that, no matter the hardship, good would ultimately triumph. These stories, passed down from generation to generation, provided not just a way to pass the time, but a reminder of the community's shared identity and resilience. They offered a psychological shield against the loneliness and despair that could settle in during the long winter months. As the Slavic people gathered around the hearth, their stories wove a sense of unity, a collective strength that helped them endure the darkness of winter. The rituals, festivals, and folklore of the Slavic people were not merely cultural practices. They were vital to maintaining psychological and emotional resilience through the long winter. Winter, with its cold and isolation, could easily lead to feelings of despair, but the community's connection to the divine, the earth, and each other provided a sense of purpose and hope. The winter solstice, Kolyada, Maslenitsa, and the various other festivals were not just ways to pass the time. They were spiritual lifelines, ensuring that the people were reminded of the natural cycles, the rebirth of the sun, and the promise of spring. These rituals fostered a sense of collective identity, connecting each person to the community and the land. At a time when nature seemed to be at its harshest, when survival was uncertain, and the cold could consume even the most well-prepared, these rituals reminded the people that life would go on. Spring would come, the land would thaw, and with it, hope would return. The harsh winters of the Slavic heartlands were a crucible, testing not just the physical endurance of the people, but their very spirit. The long, dark months, where the land lay frozen and the winds howled through every crevice, demanded not only physical strength, but an unmatched adaptability. The Slavic people, however, met these challenges not with despair, but with ingenuity, resilience, and a deep communal belief that no adversity would break their bond with the land or each other. To survive the bitter cold, the Slavic people relied on a combination of practical survival skills and spiritual rituals. They built homes from wood, earth, and thatch structures designed not only to withstand the brutal cold, but to be sustainable and repairable, allowing families to maintain their homes for generations. The process of gathering firewood, Preserving food and tending to livestock was grueling but essential. They learned how to use every resource available, from hunting wild boar and deer to raising and caring for animals like cattle, sheep, and pigs, each providing sustenance and materials to help families endure. Every part of the hunt, from tracking game through deep snow to processing and preserving every inch of the animal, was handled with a careful, resourceful approach. Meat was salted, smoked, or dried. Bones and antlers were turned into tools. Skins were tanned into clothing or bedding. Nothing went to waste, and everything had its place in the larger survival strategy. Perhaps most importantly, the Slavic people embraced a system of communal labor that ensured no family had to bear the hardships of winter alone. Hunting, firewood gathering, and food preservation were shared tasks. When the snow piled up and the wind made the air sharp with cold, neighbors helped each other, ensuring that all would have enough to survive. The communal efforts went beyond practicalities. They reflected a deep-rooted sense of interconnectedness. No person in the village was an island. Survival was dependent on the collective strength of the community. But winter survival was not merely a test of physical strength. It was also a test of community cohesion and spiritual belief. The physical aspects of survival, gathering resources, managing livestock, and ensuring warmth were vital. But they were only one part of the equation. The other, perhaps even more critical, part was the mental and spiritual resilience that helped the Slavic people maintain hope through the long, dark winter months. The rituals and festivals that punctuated the harshest of seasons played a crucial role in sustaining the spirit of the people. Celebrations like Kolyada, the winter solstice, were not simply times for feasts and music. They were sacred occasions that allowed the people to come together, reaffirming their connection to the sun, to nature, and to each other. The rituals that honored deities like Dashbog and Mokosh, and the seasonal festivals that marked the return of light, helped the people remember that winter was only a part of the natural cycle. The bleakness of the long nights and the suffocating cold were temporary. Spring, renewal, and growth would always follow. Moreover, the connection to their ancestors through Rodnovery, ancestor worship, and the protection of spirits like the Domovoi helped provide psychological resilience. By honoring the dead and seeking their guidance, the people felt connected to the broader tapestry of life, rooted in history and the wisdom of generations. Their survival was not merely an individual struggle, but a continuation of the strength and knowledge passed down through the ages. Each story, each ritual, each shared moment around the fire reinforced the people's resolve to endure. Even when faced with the most extreme conditions, the collective spirit of the Slavic people never wavered. The folklore, the tales of gods and heroes, and the spiritual practices that anchored their lives in a shared belief system gave them the mental and emotional fortitude to keep going, to face the challenges of winter with dignity, and to emerge on the other side with a sense of unity. The strength of the Slavic people in enduring harsh winters is, above all, a testament to their ingenuity and tenacity. It was a story written not in books, but in the very soil they tilled, the wood they chopped, and the fire they stoked. The homes they built were not just shelters, but fortified bastions of resilience, designed to be repaired, adapted, and rebuilt as necessary. The spiritual practices that kept the community strong were not abstract beliefs, but lived, breathing forces that shaped every action, from the cutting of wood to the preparation of meals. They thrived in conditions that would break weaker souls. The long, brutal winters didn't diminish their spirit. Rather, they drew out the best in them. Their deep connection to the land, their faith in each other, and their respect for the cycles of nature gave them the tools they needed to survive and even thrive. Every song sung around the fire, every shared meal, every piece of firewood chopped, and every prayer offered was an act of survival, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity, community, and belief. In facing the relentless cold, the Slavic people displayed a resilience that was rooted not just in their survival skills, but in their shared culture, their spiritual beliefs, and their unbreakable community bonds. These winters were not just endured, but met head-on with resourcefulness, camaraderie, and an unwavering faith that, as the sun always rises after the longest night, so too would they rise from the trials of winter to greet the warmth of the spring. And so, the story of their survival is a reminder, a living history of the strength of the human spirit, a reminder that when the cold winds howl and the days grow dark, it is not the isolation that sees us through, but the strength of community and the belief that, no matter how long the night, the dawn will always come.